and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 122. And the title of this episode is Pedal to the Metal, World War III is starting to accelerate to cover up the economic collapse. And I'll go over why I named this report this, and we'll go into that. But let's get started with the economic collapse news. We're going to go back to Cyprus, and Cyprus has agreed, and the lenders and the government all agreed that 47.5% would be perfect to take from the people. Almost half of their money if you have 100,000 euros or more. So just think of yourself in whatever country you're in, if you're in America or Australia, Europe, England, and you had a bank holiday and they came out and you woke up one morning and you couldn't take your money out and everything was frozen and they told you that they were taking half of your money. How would you feel at that point? I can't even imagine what the Cypriots must feel like knowing that all their money, their hard-earned money that they work for, is going to completely disappear. And I understand that they're going to get bank stock or whatever other pieces of paper, and they're going to, tell them that, your money's still here, but it's not really here. And oh, and by the way, we still have capital controls. Your bank accounts are still frozen. You can't take anything out. It's been over 100 days now, and it's just not good for the Cypriot people. And again, they came out and, in the beginning they said, if you remember, it was going to be like, 8%, 16%, then they said 37.5%, and then they said anywhere between 50 and 60%. So I guess when they say 47.5%, that makes you feel good because they didn't take out 50 to 60%. But no matter which way you look at it, it is awful, and it's a template for the bail-ins. We do have here in England and the United States the FDIC Bank of England document. Europe, Canada, Australia, most of these countries are having some sort of legislation drawn up to include the bail-ins. Again, if you look in the United States at a lot of the terms of service of the banks, you will see that they have changed their terms of service, and they have stated that that everyone is not a depositor. They've changed them into creditors, and they listed a whole bunch of disaster scenarios, and you're not able to go after the officers, representatives of the banks if there were riots, war, computer malfunctions, cyber attacks, blackout, EMP. They just have a whole list of things that go on with this. Okay, let's move on here. Now back to housing, and we know that housing is not doing as well as the mainstream media wants us all to think. What is happening with housing? Well, since the interest rates are rising, it makes it much more difficult for people to qualify to purchase homes. So what they've done is they're trying to make it a no down payment or $500 or $1,000 down payment type of mortgage, and a lot of people are moving into ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, to afford these homes, and people who are already have their homes are switching to ARMs so they can lower their payments to make it easier for them to live. But what's happening is those people who had existing ARMs at already low interest rates have seen them creep up a little bit, and their payments are getting higher. And we're seeing this all over the place, and a sure sign that housing is not doing well is that the mortgage applications have plunged, and that will eventually move into the sales of the homes. Already home builders like D.R. Horton are seeing traffic decline and new home sales decline, and this will go forward as all of these mortgage applications that are non-existent now start to taper off, and the sales start to taper off, and then all of a sudden we will see that the sales of homes are just out of reach for the everyday person because most of them are underemployed, unemployed, and a lot of them have foreclosed. And we have to remember the Fed is still buying the toxic real estate from all the banks because they have tons of foreclosures still on the books. And the housing recovery is not there. And we can see this by a report that came out that 4 in 5 in the U.S. fear near poverty and they have no work. Now, how could this be possible? 4 out of 5 people in the U.S. are near poverty or have no work, but the housing market is supposedly booming. It makes no sense whatsoever. And this goes on to say 4 out of 5 U.S. adults struggle with joblessness, near poverty, or reliance on welfare for at least parts of their lives, a sign of deteriorating economic security and an elusive American dream. And Irene Sailors went on to say, I think it's going to get worse. If you do try to go apply for a job, they're not hiring people. They're not paying that much to even go to work. And these part-time jobs that people have to take after they were laid off from their full-time job, some people have 1, 2, even 3 part-time jobs and still aren't making the same amount as they were when they had their full-time jobs. So for the government and for the Fed and for the mainstream media to say this housing market is booming, it isn't. The stock market, the bond market, the student loan market, the housing market are all being driven by the Fed. The Fed is the market. The end. That's it. Now the government realizes something. The stock market and the economy are at a disconnect. They're disconnecting. They're completely on the opposite sides now. Now, the stock market is down a little bit today. Gold is ended in a positive note. But even though they want everyone and everyone's eyes are on the stock market at all-time new highs, they realize that the economy, the unemployment, the GDP, inflation, all the calculations they changed, they're still having a problem convincing everyone that the economy is doing well. So even though they went out of their way and they changed all the calculations and all the data that's coming in is fake and manipulated, so it allows them to show the mainstream media and all those other people that are still sleeping that the economy's doing well, unemployment's coming down, and the GDP numbers are not where they want them to be. Because when you're getting into the negative area of GDP, people start going, wait, what did they just say? So what do they have to do? Well, they need to change it again because the economy is getting so bad that the changed calculation for GDP is not enough, so they have to manipulate the numbers further. And what this goes on to say is, you don't like how high debt to GDP figures are? Well, revise them. Unhappy at the post-recovery growth rates? Revise them. Disappointed at the pace of economic improvement in the last decade or two compared to the rest of the world? Well, revise them. And this is what they're doing. The Bureau of Economic Analysis announced on Wednesday it will start counting spending on research, development, and copyrights as investment and reflect pension deficit for the first time. Combined, they are expected to add 3% to the GDP. And what they went on to say is, we are carrying these major changes all the way back in time, which for us means to 1929, so we are essentially rewriting economic history. And this is what they're doing right now. They are rewriting and changing everything so people are not aware of what is going on. And they did it with unemployment. People think, unemployment's around 7.6%, where it's really around 23% because they changed it back in 1994. Even if you use their U6 numbers with their new calculation, unemployment's around 14%. So, I mean, and if you look at inflation, GDP, all those calculations are continually changed. And this is how they're trying to get by and hold on before the collapse hits. Now, we know that President Obama, went around the country telling everyone if the sequester hits, it's going to be terrible. We can't take these cuts. And, we've seen what they've done. It's always towards the people. But he had no problem signing an executive order that will allow him to send $500 million to the Muslim terrorists in the West Bank. And he signed an executive order quietly on Friday afternoon, as everyone was too busy, paying attention to the royal birth. And President Obama wrote, "I hereby certify that it is important to the national security interest of the United States to waive the provisions of Section 7040A of the Act as carried forward by the CR in order to provide funds appropriate to carry out Chapter 4 of Part 2 of the Foreign Assistance Act." And he is sending money over $500 million worth, bypassing Congress, basically, and that's what he is doing. Now, in a recent poll, in the Pew poll, it finds since 9/11 that the majority of Americans, 56% say the federal courts fail to provide adequate limits on telephone and internet data the government is collecting as part of an anti-terrorism effort. And an even larger percentage, 70%, believe that the government uses this data for purposes other than investigating terrorism. Really? Moreover, 63% think the government is also gathering information about the content of communications. That demonstrates a decisive rejection of the U.S. government's three primary defenses of its secret program. There is adequate oversight. We're not listening to the content of communications, and spying is only used to keep you safe. And we know that this is not the case, that they are spying to put people in groups, to see who are going to be the troublemakers, see who is going to be rounded up, who has weapons, who has gold, and this is what they're trying to do before the economic collapse. Okay, now let's move on here. Now, Egypt's interim leader gives green light for civilian arrests. And what's happening over in Egypt is everything is getting out of control. And John Kerry, came out and says that they need to act immediately to help their country take a step back from the brink, and expressing deep concern over the situation and calling it a pivotal moment for Egypt. And what's happening is they're giving this order to go around and arrest people who are protesting because the government central bankers are worried that the uprising will remove what's left of the puppet government that is in Egypt. And if that government is removed and replaced, that is a threat to the US dollar and the central bank. And if that is a threat, what will happen is the United States government will send troops in to bring back order and to keep intact the puppet government that they have in Egypt. And this is why they want the current government, which is the same government as before, to keep order and to keep everything contained before it gets out of hand. And this is what he is saying. Now, we realize that many nations are starting and have been doing drills across the world. The United States and Japan had a drill where Japan and the United States were practicing how to land on an island and take it over. We had the Chinese and Russian fleet have a drill. We have China and Russia having another drill. The United States and South Koreans had a drill together, and we see this happening all over. We see little skirmishes of China and Japan, and we have the Syrian, Iran, Israel, U.S. Type of war starting to emerge in the Middle East, and we're seeing all the uprising in the Middle East starting to occur, and the United States is losing its grip on keeping the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. And we are seeing now that Russia is quietly renewing a request to set up an air and naval base in Cyprus with the goal of being better able to deploy troops to Syria to back the government of President Assad against possible Turkish and Western intervention. And this goes on to say the naval base at Limassol and the air base at Paphos would serve Moscow's purpose for amphibious operation and the air base for support and ground troops that would be deployed rapidly, especially to Syria. And we are seeing all these countries maneuvering their assets into place to strategically set up for World War III, and this is what's happening right now. And we see this further. Israel Navy is installing systems to counter, I'm going to pronounce this Russian missile here, the Yakhont Russian anti-ship missile. Now, Israel's Navy has begun installing a new defense system on its missile boats that would protect them from the feared Russian anti-ship missile. So we're seeing now Israel worrying about Russia, because Israel has gone in and taken out the arms that they were delivering to Syria, and they have done this now twice, reports have shown, and Israel is getting nervous because now they're putting this onto their boats, and we're seeing that Russia needs a strategic base to go into Syria. The United States has a deadline of September 30th to get weapons over to Syria because the fiscal budget runs out on September 30th, and then Congress has to revote on all this. And what is happening now is the paid mercenaries in Syria are losing ground, and they are losing the battle completely. Now, Syria has recaptured Homs, and they're on their way to Aleppo. And if they capture Aleppo, it will be Assad's decisive victory in the civil war. And this is a huge, huge hit to the paid mercenaries, to Israel, to the U.S. government / central bankers, and they will not stand for this, and they will come out fighting any way they can. And one way they're doing this is Saudi Arabia signs deal with Israeli army to buy weapons for militants fighting in the Syrian government, and they're supplying the rebels, the paid mercenaries, with old Israeli armaments. And the Saudi Arabian paid around $50 million to get this weapons over to them. So they're trying everything and anything to keep and to help the paid mercenaries. But guess what? It is not working. So Israel, the U.S. government, central bankers, something is going to happen to bring the war into Syria, to bring the U.S. and Israel into the war in Syria. And the only way to do that, because right now the American people in Congress are completely against this, There was polls that were taking, and it was like 70% of the people are not. They want to have nothing to do with Syria. We should not be over there. We should not be fighting any of those wars. And the government will need to do something to get the American people begging and Congress begging to go to war with Syria, and the only way to do this is something that is horrific, bloody. It could be anything. It could be a nuclear weapon. It could be like a dirty bomb. It could be chemical. It could be biological. It could be anything. Anything that will get the American people snapped into what's going on, which they think, which is an illusion, but wake them up enough to say, hey, look what Syria just did. We need to go in there and get them because they just did this to Americans. Now we're seeing uprisings in Bahrain, in around the I guess the eastern section of Saudi Arabia, and we're seeing these United States controlled areas the people are starting to rise up and cause problems. And what's happening is the United States government is losing its grip all across the Middle East at this point. And in Bahrain, there's a recommendation to ban all protests. Now you have to remember, in Bahrain is the home of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. And the United States government, central bankers, control this area. They control Saudi Arabia, and they're starting to see protests. So they're having laws that are being put out there to ban all protests. And we're seeing this happening all around the Middle East at this point, and it's getting much more difficult for the United States to keep everything under control and to keep the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. Because you have to remember, as the United States government is waging war all over the place to keep the U.S. dollar right now, China is making deals and cementing the Chinese currency as the next reserve currency backed by gold. So they're making deals while the United States is waging war to keep the dollar as the reserve currency. And we're starting to see this all over, and now they're putting a ban on protest in Bahrain to try to stop this. Now, to take this one step further, Iran is going to get more sanctions because, the sanctions they have now is not enough. So now they need more because what's left to do except to invade? What they're going to do, a vote is expected later this week in the House of Representatives to impose yet more sanctions on Iran ahead of the inauguration of President Rouhani next weekend. The newest sanctions will further target Iran's oil exports, aiming to dramatically reduce the amount of exports allowed worldwide. What will these sanctions do? They're trying to squeeze Iran and trying to provoke them so they eventually do something, but they're not going to do anything. Iran has figured out ways of bypassing all of these sanctions. They're trading electricity, they're trading gold. Every time they come up with something, they find a way around it, and eventually they'll continually find a way around this because the propaganda of Iran having nuclear weapons they've been saying this for the last 20 plus years, that they're 5 years away from creating this nuclear bomb that we've never seen, and I've said this in other reports in previous episodes, that Israel, the United States government, always comes out saying they're 2 years away, they're 5 years away, and I have this on one of my other episodes that I recorded, and I broke it down over the years how many times they've said this, and we've never seen any type of bomb. Just like in Iraq, we never really saw the weapons of mass destruction because there weren't any. That was just to go in there and get rid of Gaddafi and put everything back onto the reserve currency and set up the central bank and protect the oil fields. That's really what that was for. Now, the Philippines are going to move their Air Force Navy camps to the other side of their island, so they have faster access to the China Sea area. And the United States is using the Philippines as a rotation base, which eventually will become a United States base again once the war breaks out. And they're moving all their assets into the Philippines because it is a strategic location. So from everything that we're seeing right now, all these countries are placing their assets where they need them. They're strategically maneuvering everything, and they're preparing for World War III. And this war, the central bankers will need to get this moving to cover the economic collapse. And from everything that we're seeing, it seems like it's starting to accelerate now because there are certain things in motion, certain things happening, and quite possibly we will see a high probability we will see part one of the collapse this fall. Now, there was a report that said this new amendment called Parental Rights Amendment to hand over control of your children to the federal government. And this goes on to say, Section 3 of the PRA, which is the Parental Rights Amendment, dictates that both federal and state governments can override or infringe parental authority if it serves the highest order of government interests. Now, what does that mean? This disturbing and vague language would most assuredly open up a Pandora's box of government authoritarianism in which federal judges would be free to redefine the term of parental authority at whim as long as it serves the highest order. So what they're saying is if it serves the government and the actions of the government, they have every right to take the children. They do no longer belong to the parent. They now belong to the government. Every person, every parent should be outraged at this, saying that the children of parents are no longer, the parents have no rights to them if it serves the highest order of government interest. And they always use very vague language. It's lawyer speak, it's lawyer babble, whatever you want to call it. So when it comes time to say, what is this? They can make up whatever they want. It doesn't matter at this point. So they'll just say, well, this is the highest order, and we can take your children. Now they belong to the federal government. They belong, and we're going to put them to work doing this or that. And this is absolutely ridiculous. You can see the government is taking away our rights. The government is removing, at least in their mind, believing they're removing the rights because rights cannot be removed. But look how far they are going with all of this. And that reminded me of another right that has really nothing to do with this, but I just remembered, you have the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, the freedom to talk out about your government, to vocalize how you feel. But we have to remember back in March 2012, the anti-protest law that was passed and signed by the president, and that was H.R. 347, was signed by the President Obama. And what that says is marching outside the Democratic or Republican National Convention is not allowed. Yelling, anything out outside the barbershop where Mitt Romney is getting his hair trimmed is not allowed. Marching in front of the entrance of the New York Stock Exchange is not allowed. Marching in front of the Fed Going to the gates of the White House and demanding the president read the Constitution is not allowed. And they set up these laws. All of these laws, the NDAA, the Patriot Act, the Miranda exception rule, uh, the parental rights amendment, HR 347, which is the anti-protest law, all the NSA spying, the disregard to the Fourth Amendment, all of these things have removed the rights of the people. If you believe they can be removed, they are. If you as a people, you are born with these rights, so they cannot be removed. And the only way to prove it to the government is to do one thing, is to speak out about it peacefully. Now, we know this whole thing with Snowden is going on about whistleblowers, the Fourth Amendment, and all these things. And it's very interesting. Obama he used to have this website called change.gov, which has now been taken down. But if you go to the Wayback Machine, there, now, the Obama administration, the government, is going after Snowden, calling him a traitor, which really is the NSA, Obama, and all those people who violated the Fourth Amendment. They are the traitors, not Snowden. But on the site, if you go back to the Wayback Machine, and there's a picture of it here on my site, x22report.com, on this page, scroll down, and you'll see it's highlighted in yellow. It says something that says this: protect whistleblowers, and this was on change.gov. Often the best source of information about waste, fraud, and abuse in government is an existing government employee committed to public integrity and willing to speak out. Such acts of courage and patriotism, which can sometimes save lives and often save taxpayer dollars, should be encouraged rather than stifled. We need to empower federal employees as watchdogs of wrongdoing and partners in performance. Barack Obama will strengthen whistleblower laws to protect federal workers who expose waste, fraud, and abuse of authority in government. Obama will ensure that the government agencies expedite the process of reviewing whistleblower claims, and whistleblowers have full access to courts and due process. Well, we can see that's completely the opposite of what's happening right now, because Obama's, screaming on the top of the lungs that, with Eric Holder, that Snowden is a traitor. Snowden committed treason. Snowden will be arrested. Completely opposite what that used to be on change.gov. President Obama, before elected, said a lot of things. It seems now everything is the opposite, and any link or tie to what he said has started to be removed now. But with the power of the internet, with the power of caching, with the power of keeping records, we can always have information of what happened, especially with YouTube and everything else. And we can see that things have completely changed, and they are completely removing all our rights because they know the economic collapse is coming, and they cannot have the people have these rights during the collapse. Because, again, the government is into power. They need to maintain control the way they want it. Not the way the people want it, but the way they want it. And I just wanted to bring up one point with Mike Rogers, who is pushing CISPA, and he's the one who authored CISPA, and he wants the spying of people. He's worrying about cyber attacks, and he wants CISPAs pushed. We have to remember that Mike Rogers' wife, Christy Clemens Rogers, was recently the president and CEO of Aegis LLC, a security defense contractor company, whom she helped to secure a $10 billion contract with the State Department. It seems like if CISPA passes, they will benefit greatly from this, because I'm sure they have tons of stock in this company, and they will definitely get the contract, and they will make tons of money, almost like Dianne Feinstein's husband, who makes tons of money from all the contracts that he receives from the government. Okay, let's move on here. Now, the Apple site had a cyber attack, and their whole developer section, which hosted 6 million software developers that used it, completely went down. And they shut it down because there was a cyber attack threatening it. It was hitting it. And at this point, uh, from the intrusion last week, they do not know what information was compromised by the attack. And this is very interesting because this is where all the developers who create these apps, they use this site. They have all their information, their company information, and they were cyber attacked last week. Now, there was another report talking about cyber attacks in space. And what they're saying here is that any type of satellite could be hit by a cyber attack because the ground systems, the ground computer systems, could be hit, and then the instructions could be forwarded to a satellite in space. And what this goes on to say, it has become clear to anyone involved in the field that spaceborne assets can be damaged in various ways, including the option of inflicting damage on the computers that command the satellites, and not necessarily on the computers on board the satellite. Cyber attacks may be staged against the ground station controlling the satellite and dictating its operation, thereby damaging the system located in space, hundreds or thousands of kilometers above the Earth. Every satellite operating in space relies on communication with the ground. This communication may also be disrupted in order to interrupt the normal functioning of the satellite. Using the cyber attack, satellite operation may be interrupted by attacking the electrical power infrastructure supplying power to the ground section of a spaceborne system. Another way an attack satellite is by inserting fake components into the system so that it will contain a hostile element while the satellite operators remain unaware of this fact. And it goes on to say that the U.S., the authorities found thousands of fake components, mainly chips, intended for installation in the next generation of U.S. navigation satellites. Very interesting. So now we see cyber attacks spreading to satellites, medical devices, power infrastructure, water system, nuclear, bank, other financial institutions, and just companies. We're seeing this, and I have to mention the entire U.S. Military weapon infrastructure also. And again, Panetta, DHS, Janet Napolitano, all these people have come out saying an attack on the U.S. will be considered an act of war. And most of the attacks now they're blaming on China because China is slated to be the reserve currency. China is hoarding gold to back their reserve currency. The U.S. dollar is losing the reserve status all around the world. The central bankers, U.S. government, are doing everything just to keep this going. They have every single finger, every single toe in the dam, and the dam is about to burst. And what's interesting, there was an article, this was in Zero Hedge, that the taper is coming, and this is what Wall Street thinks. All of these firms are making predictions of what they think this taper is going to be this fall. And then if we align everything and we look at everything and we look at all the indications of what's happening, we have the September 30th fiscal year coming to an end where they have the money to supply the rebels and to go into Syria. If they bypass this date and don't get this war started, they have to start the process all over again. We see Israel, China, Russia, North Korea, the Philippines, Japan, all getting their assets strategically located in a place ready for war. We see other things happening around the world. We see our rights being taken away. We see the gun bill UN Arms Treaty, CISPA, all pending in the Senate. We see Mike Rogers. He's been out there a lot now, pushing CISPA because they need it passed. Again, something is going to happen this fall. I believe it's going to be a Part 1 crash. I believe they were testing to see how the market reacted. They saw that the market does not like it, and they are preparing for this Part 1 of this crash that's coming. Hopefully they can get this war, for them, hopefully they can get this war started to cover up what is coming, and they can blame the complete collapse on another country. Because when they start to taper and the market starts going down, wouldn't it be perfect to have China cyber attack the financial institution, bring the stock market, bring the banks to their knees, siphon money out, create havoc in the market, and blame it on China, or blame it on Syria, or blame it on any other country to say, look what just happened. We need to go into this country because they just started the collapse of the market. What will this do? This will allow the Fed to taper because now the collapse is happening. They can start clearing up their books, and they don't have to really worry about that because everything is collapsing. It can't be blamed on them. It can't be blamed on the taper. It can't be blamed on the government because it came from somewhere else. And we're seeing this completely set up for this type of Part 1 of the collapse. And I believe as the war gets started and people lose their money, bail-ins will start to happen at this point, because all the banks that are holding all their money in the stock market, that comes crashing down, so the banks are insolvent. And they will start the bail-ins at this point, freeze accounts. People will not be able to get their money, and the collapse will begin. This will be Part 1. So the Fed and the government will come out while the war is going on. We'll need money for the war, so the government will have to borrow more money, of course. So the Fed will start printing money, and the Fed will come out to say, to help the banks, to help everything, we will need to buy more of the toxic assets and pump up the stock market again. So they will push the amount of money from 85 billion to say 150 billion, and all of a sudden we will see things start to spiral out of control, and we will see things happen in the spring of 2014 really start to deteriorate. The war will get started. Congress will say yes. The people will say yes. Money will be allocated. Will be huge, huge debt. Forget about 17 trillion. You'll see this skyrocket to 20 trillion in no time because of the war, and the central bankers will be making money on both sides of this war. Listen, everyone, we know something is coming. We know it's a fact. We see it happening all around us. Everyone needs to get prepared for what is coming. There are many different scenarios. There are many different things that could happen, that might happen, and you need to be prepared for all of it. Listen, everyone, be safe, be well, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.